Here we are, 26th of February, and we're looking at Revelation 17 tonight. And I have pored over this and the next chapters. It's been 2 weeks since our last session, but I was looking at this long before that. And this is the part of, a lot of Revelation is subject to various interpretation, but for the most part, particularly, the letters to the churches. Now, there are some people, as we talked about in chapters 2 and 3, about how the churches were churches in the future. Some think they were churches obviously they were churches at the time, but that there was a historical, looking back for us now, a historical perspective to it. Some don't agree with that, but the bottom line is what Jesus, red letter, because all that is red letter, was sharing to the churches was all applicable to us as well, even though it was applicable to the churches. Then when you get to chapter 4 through 22, where we're in now, which is most people believe that it's future still, and some people believe that what has happened in Revelation has already happened in the church history. So there are some who cling to the belief that what we're reading here up until at least chapter 19, maybe 20, is already done. That's already happened. And only the last 3 chapters or so are still future. Most scholars don't subscribe to that. They subscribe to the fact that this is all future tense, tribulation type stuff, as that's what we've kind of outlined here. We've been through the seals, the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, and now the 7 bowls. And if you guys remember, last time we met when the 7th bowl was poured out, it said the 7th angel poured out his bowl into the air, and out of the temple came a loud voice from the throne saying, "It is done." Then there came flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, and a severe earthquake. And we talked about how at each, the 7th seal, trumpet, and bowl was the same thing, that the earthquake, the peals of thunder, all that stuff was happening each time. And so now, as we get into chapter 17, there is still much interpretation. And I've really struggled with this passage because many of the scholars that I listen to, and I go and I do my own study as well. I struggle with the idea that this is a literal Babylon. So I'm just going to tell you that right up front. I believe that it represents not a literal Babylon in the city of Babylon, but that it represents something different. And there are many guys who are way beyond my comprehension of the Bible who believe a literal Babylon in Babylon, Iraq, will be rebuilt and will be the city center. And in the end, I don't know that it matters, particularly if the church is raptured before then. None of this really matters to us. It's just really comprehending it. But I want to let you guys know, and I'm going to let you know as we go through this, there are several opinions that they don't compete. They're just different, but they get to the same place, which is quite unique. And so, and just so you know, I'm going right up front, full disclosure, many very serious Bible scholars believe that the woman on the beast is the Catholic Church. Just so you know, I was just listening, not 5 minutes before we started. This is the last sermon I'd listened to, and all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, is that woman adulterous Israel? Is that what that is? Because it never has occurred to me before. But what we're going to look at tonight is spiritual adultery. If you want to put a big title on this chapter, spiritual adultery is what this is. When we get to chapter 18, it'll be more like economic adultery is what it is. And so let's dive in. We're going on a real journey here tonight. I'm just going to tell you, there's a lot to cover, and there's some ahas in it. There's some wows in it, and there's going to be, when we get done, you're probably still going to be going, yeah, I don't really know which way to go, which way to believe on this. Just telling you. So, all right. Chapter 17, verse 1. Okay, remember, we just got done in chapter 16, the 7 angels with the 7 bowls. Now, John writes, one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls, so one of those 7 angels, came to me and said, come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits by many waters. So think about this, that John, these visions he's seeing, how many of you guys have seen A Christmas Carol? Charles Dickens, A Christmas Carol? You guys seen it? Think about that, right? The ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future show up to Ebenezer Scrooge and show him things. That's what's happening here. These angels are taking John and showing him things, a lot like that movie is the way just a way to relate to it. I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits by many waters. With her kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. So this prostitute who is ultimately sitting on the beast, and every time you hear the word beast, most people today describe that as the Antichrist. I mentioned it as the Antichrist, but the Antichrist is never actually mentioned in the book of Revelation. The beast is described as what we know as the Antichrist. So the prostitute is sitting on the beast ultimately by the waters. And when we get over to verse 15, it'll say, then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. So the waters represent humanity. All right, that's what the waters always represent. They represent humanity, all of humanity. So the prostitute is sitting by the water on the beast. The prostitute in this case is committing spiritual adultery with what is referred to here, the kings of the earth. Kings would be people in power. So the way I grasp this is church has been raptured. There is a false religion that is occurring, and this false religion is represented by the prostitute. Because in Hosea, no need to go there, probably can't find it anyway, but in Hosea, chapter 1, verse 2, it says this, when the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, go marry a promiscuous woman, that's a prostitute, by the way, and have children with her. For like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord. That's Israel he's talking about. Israel has been unfaithful because, and remember all the different times we've talked about the Old Testament when God commands Joshua, when they're going in to take the land in Canaan, to wipe out everybody, men, women, children, all of it, even Saul, King Saul later, same deal. And the whole issue, what God was wanting to do was to ensure that Israel would not commit spiritual adultery by marrying these women who had different gods, just like Solomon did. Solomon, man, he had everything. He had the wisdom that God gave him, and he still, all the wives that he started after everything he saw and everything he was given, he started to worship other gods because he intermarried with women who came from other countries and had other beliefs. So here, this is really a representation of the church, or the false religion at the time after the rapture happens, the false religion that is there, that is intermingling, riding on the beast and doing business with the kings of the earth. There's this system, political, religious system, that is all working in conjunction, and the prostitute is representing the false religion. All right, questions, comments, thoughts? clarifications? Okay. So with her, kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adultery. So the people of the earth were in essence all bought in on what was going on. They were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. What does that mean? What she was doing, the system that had been put together, that candidly the Satan is putting together after the church has been raptured, there's no real, let's call it, well, there's the Holy Spirit is gone, right? The restrainer has been taken out. So now you're left with people who they're not believers. They might come to faith after the rapture has happened, realizing that they missed it. And, there's a bunch of those people, but these are now the inhabitants of the world, the earth dwellers. These are the people that haven't come to faith. And they're intoxicated with, ooh, the wine of her adultery. This is all very good. Ooh, yeah, we're in on this. And remember this, okay, so there are some who believe that what we're reading right now happens in the first part of the tribulation, the first 3.5 years. I really, really struggle with that. In my opinion, this is just my opinion. I want to make that really clear. As I read 17, 18, and 19, I read this very clearly that this is all at the very, very end of the tribulation period. This all happens in no time at all. It says we're going to get to the 10 kings that are given power for 1 hour. It's not one literal hour. It's for an hour, an appointed hour, but it's not going to take long at all. This could be a week, chapter 17, 18, and 19. It could, but I believe it's not that long at all. And you do your own study. But as I've read this, I don't know how many times I've read this now. It makes a lot of sense to me that at the end of the tribulation, this is happening. Now, here's the other thing, because, I'll get to that later. We'll get to that later. Okay, verse 3. Then the angel carried me away in the spirit, capital S, into a wilderness. Now remember, Israel was taken away and protected in the wilderness for 3.5 years. We saw that in the earlier chapters. So now it's the angel carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness where I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names, 7 heads and 10 horns. Let's go back over a couple of chapters to chapter 12. We're going to read one verse in chapter 12, one in chapter 13. So in chapter 12, verse 3, then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its head. And a little bit later, we find out that in verse 9, the great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent that was called the devil or Satan. So the beast that she's riding on is Satan in essence. Then in chapter 13, verse 1, the dragon, same one, stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns, 7 heads, and 10 crowns on its horn, and each had a blasphemous name. So here we are back over in chapter 17. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with what? Blasphemous names, with 7 heads and 10 horns. So this is all the same beast that we're seeing, 7 heads, 10 horns, representing the same thing. And the 7 heads we're going to see represent 7 hills, but that also represents 7, let's call it governments or kingdoms, 7 kingdoms. And so we're gonna get to that in a few minutes, but that's what the 7 heads are about. And the 10 horns, again, represent authority. And we're going to see the rise of a 10 region kingdom at the very end that give their power back over to the beast. So the woman is riding on the scarlet beast. Now, this woman, though, the prostitute is one thing. This woman is riding on a scarlet beast. And it says here, the woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and glittering with gold and precious stones and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. So, a lot of wealth, scarlet, purple, gold goblets, the gold cup is filled with her adulteries. And this is, as we get into later in this chapter, we're going to read about that she sits on a city with 7 hills. And the city of 7 hills is, at this time when John was receiving this, and even today, that city is known as Rome. Now, there are a lot of people that, believe that there's a revived Roman Empire, and we're going to get to how that comes about here in a few minutes. But there are some who go even to become even more specific. It's the Vatican in Rome. And you guys may or may not know this, but the Vatican is uber wealthy. I mean, like, some believe that it's incalculable how much wealth the Vatican has. And so this is that. And, the vicar, the Pope, is the vicar of God, replacing God to speak to the people. And it's those who are Catholic really dislike this. And it's not, it may or may not be. Many people believe that it's probably the Catholic Church. Some believe it could be another religion that comes out of Babylon. I happen to believe that it's all centered around Rome. Anybody, any questions, comments, input, clarification, arguments? Okay, so the woman in this case, dressed in purple and scarlet, or cardinal is actually the actual color. And if you just look at the colors that are represented in the Catholic Church, cardinal is one of the major colors in it. So it's just very interesting. Dress was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls, had a golden cup in her hand filled with the abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. The name written on her forehead was a mystery. Now, back in the day, in the section of town, the red light district of town, back in John's day, the red light district, where guys would go for prostitutes, they would wear headbands with their name on the headband. So this particular woman, prostitute, has a name on her headband, on her forehead: Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and the abominations of the earth. So this is where there are varying beliefs about Babylon itself. Is it a literal Babylon? Because it says it's a mystery. Is it mystery Babylon? Does that mean it's a metaphor for something else, for a world religious system? Is it an actual city that is rebuilt? Because when you get back over to Daniel, it talks about, and Jeremiah 51, it talks about Babylon being destroyed and never being inhabited again. And again, if you see this happening at the beginning of the tribulation, or the first 3.5 years, perhaps that's a thing. I see it at the end of the tribulation, so no one's going to inhabit it anyway. So it's very subject to great interpretation, whether it's a real city, a metaphorical city, or a false religion, or a city that represents something else. And because of what we have in our world today, what we know of our world today, it lines up greatly, in my opinion, with the Catholic Church, is what it lines up with. That's just me. People may be really upset if you're watching this online. I would say go do your own research and come to your own conclusion. Anybody? Comments? Thoughts? Response? Shut up, Terry. That can't be right. And before we get to verse 6, I want to also help you guys do a little background on Babylon. All right. So Babylon comes, we're going to go back to Genesis for a little while and see where Babylon comes from. It comes from the Tower of Babel, and Babel in Hebrew means the gate of God. So remember that they were trying to build the Tower of Babel, which means a gateway to God. That's what they were trying to build. So that's where this whole Babylon thing starts. And I'll go back there. If you guys could flip with me, go over to Genesis, way back at the beginning of your Bible. And we'll get to chapter 10 and find out how all this begins. And we're going to talk about where the mother-child worship began. Again, if you think about the Catholic Church, they worship the mother-child relationship. It's all about the Mother Mary and baby Jesus. It's a big deal because it comes out of what we're going to talk about right now. So in chapter 10, there's a story about Noah. They've come out of the ark. Now they're off. They're planting again. They're starting to live and things like that. And Noah gets drunk and lays down. He's in his tent. He's naked. One of his sons, Ham, comes in, who is the youngest son, comes in, sees him naked, goes out and tells his brothers about it. His brothers come in backwards and they lay clothing of some sort over him so that he's not naked anymore. And they come in backwards so that they don't see him. Well, Noah finds out about this and then he curses, not Ham necessarily, but one of his sons, Canaan, which turns into the land of Canaan. They settle there, and that's who Joshua ultimately has to go displace, crazy as that is. And that all comes from Canaan, from the curse right here. What? So one of the other sons of Ham is a guy named Nimrod. And I don't know about you guys, maybe you remember this. I remember when I was in grade school, junior high, I guess junior high and high school, we would call other guys Nimrod. You Nimrod. Anybody else? Or was that just me? Yep. All right, good. So I got another one. Good. So Nimrod, we're going to go to now Genesis in chapter 10. Cush was the father of Nimrod, who became a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter. It says before the Lord, but it means against the Lord. The actual translation would be he was in God's face. So he was defying God, but Nimrod became the leader of this particular known world. And they started moving east, all these people. And I'll get over now. So that's Nimrod. And I'll just continue there for a second. And it says, this is why it said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord, the first centers of his kingdom were Babylon, Uruk, Akkad, and Calneh in Shinar. So he started to move east and started to build this city, Babylon, in the land of Shinar, which is now what we would know as Iraq. So then over in Genesis 11, now the whole world had one language and one common speech. As the people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly and use the brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered all over the face of the earth. So what are they doing? They're trying to make their own significance. It's all about them, not about God. And this becomes the religion, the world religion that is against God and is still against God today. Anti-God, anti-Christ. So then Nimrod, check this out. So that's happening. And I want to show you guys something. We'll read it together. I hope this is of interest to you guys because it's interesting to me. So right here, the legend of Nimrod, the system of worship has its origin in the legend of Nimrod and his wife Semiramis. Nimrod, the great grandson of Noah. Now just think about this for a second. It's the great grandson of Noah. Now remember, Noah, the whole reason he was saved is because he was found blameless. So Noah was a righteous man. So he has his 3 sons who helped him build the ark, Ham being one of them. Ham had a son named Cush, and which is also translated Egypt. Don't ask me why they're translated that way, but that would be Egypt, and he settled down in Egypt. So Cush has a son named Nimrod, and this is where it all goes bad. I mean, Noah's still alive at this point. It's amazing to me. So he's a grandson of Noah. He rebels against God, like his father Cush. Eventually, Nimrod was put to death for his evil deeds. And according to ancient patriarchal system, parts of his body were sent to various cities as a warning. His wife, Semiramis, okay, here's where the mother-child worship begins, okay? Semiramis fled, but spread the rumor that he had ascended to heaven, where he had become one with the sun. Okay, sun worship. When Semiramis later gave birth to a son, she claimed that it was the reincarnation of her deified husband and that he had returned to save the human race. So notice what's happening here. Semiramis claims that she had an immaculate conception because Nimrod has died. She says he's now risen and he's with the sun. And she now has another child who supposedly there's no father for, whose name is ultimately Tammuz. And she says it's Nimrod being reincarnated, coming back to life. So you have a virgin birth, an immaculate conception with a savior named Nimrod who comes back as Tammuz. Are you guys with me? Any questions, comments, clarification?
Question. Or it's not even a question, so comment. It sounds like to me, just what you read, they are imitating what Jesus done.
It's what Satan always does, guys. He does nothing on his own. He only imitates. Now remember, this was before Christ was born. Jesus came as a child. This was before that. But watch what happens here, you guys. Oof, wow. So she, Semiramis, was later deified as the mother of the sun god, which would be Tammuz, reincarnated Nimrod. And it was supposed she had ascended into heaven as the queen of heaven. She actually called herself the queen of heaven. In various cultures throughout the history around the world, the same basic deities have been worshipped under different names. Now we're going to go back up here. So what happens is Semiramis tells everybody that, because ultimately Tammuz dies again at 33 years old, but she's still alive. She calls herself the queen of heaven. And she then says to everybody, worship me. I will talk to Tammuz because even though he's dead, he's actually alive. You just can't see him. Only I can see him. That's the Semiramis. So she's saying that she's now the conduit between Nimrod, who's died and been brought back to life through an immaculate conception and then died again, but didn't die, went to heaven, but nobody can see him. And when somebody might say, well, this is the same with Jesus, except Jesus showed himself to 500 people before he ascended to heaven. But no one saw Tammuz after he died. But now watch this. So because Semiramis did that, the pagan system of sun worship, this is amazing, has 3 main aspects: father, mother, and son. All right. Nimrod, Semiramis, and the sun, Tammuz. In ancient Chaldean times, these were the god Baal or Merodach, or otherwise known as Marduk. And Marduk, the worship of Marduk involved child sacrifice all over the place. Ninus, the sun, who was also worshipped as Tammuz. The female goddess, Rhea, who was also worshipped as Ishtar. What does that sound like? Anybody? Anybody? Ishtar, Easter. This is where Easter comes from. And then Astarte or Beltis, she was also referred to as the Queen of Heaven and the wrath subduer. Mary has received the names in Catholicism. Mother and child worship was the basis of the ancient religions. In various religions around the world, the same system of worship perpetuated under different names in Egypt. The mother and child were worshipped as Isis and Osiris or Horus in India, as Isi and Iswara, in China and Japan as the mother goddess Xingmu with child, in Greece, Ceres or Irene and Plutus, in Rome, Fortuna and Jupiter or Venus and Adurnus, and in Scandinavia, Phrygia and Baldr. The mother and child were worshipped in Babylon as Ishtar and Tammuz. Just a little known fact for you, Tammuz was born on December 25th on our calendar, and Tammuz died around Easter, Ishtar. And in Phoenicia as Ashtaroth and Baal. And you see these all through the Old Testament and even in the New Testament. Moreover, the child was worshipped as both husband and son. God the Father and the Son of the Mother Goddess. The male component is a counterfeit of Jesus Christ. Biblical names used for Jesus were also used for the child in ancient religions. Zoroaster was referred to as the seed. So remember, Jesus was the seed back in Genesis when the Lord was talking to Satan, the serpent. Her seed, you will, and then even Abraham, your seed. Mithra, the Persian sun god, was referred to as the savior. Dionysius was referred to as the sin bearer. Bacchus, the branch. Bacchus was a fertility god. And Vishnu, the victim man, and Osiris, the king of kings. So all of these are similar to the names of Jesus, but the mother-child worship began with Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. Tammuz being born on December 25th, and the Christmas is actually a Babylonian holiday that started on December 25th that Christians now use as the birth of Jesus, but it's literally a Babylonian holiday in its origin. And Easter, Ishtar, is the worship in Babylonian times of Tammuz being ascended to heaven. And so when we celebrate Passover, Easter, Resurrection Day, we as Christ followers should refer to it as Resurrection Day, not as Easter. And so this goes on, but it's incredible that our holidays have their foundations or origins in Babylonian cult worship. Questions, thoughts? Where did I find that information? Girl? Man, if you go look at these things like that right there, I just Googled on mother-son worship, but Missler does a ton on this. Gary Harwick does a ton on this and really breaks down the mother-child worship and where it all comes from. It's quite incredible.
Okay, thank you.
Pretty wild, huh?
It is super wild.
Yeah. Yep. All right. That's that one. Okay, back to our study, back to our regularly scheduled program. So I just wanted you guys to understand Babylon, that's why to me, this is just, again, I just want to be really clear. As I read all of this, to me, this represents the Babylonian system, this false religion that was started back in Genesis chapter 10 and 11. All right. And again, I just want to be clear again that there are many, many, many scholars who believe that it's a literal Babylon. It's going to be rebuilt still, and that's going to be the center of the false religion and the governmental center of the Antichrist or the beast. Could be. And maybe, if I'm being really honest, maybe I don't want it to be a renewed Babylon, because that's going to take way too freaking long, and I expect the return of the Lord a whole lot sooner than that. So just keeping it real. All right. Verse 6. I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. So the woman, the false religious system, is drunk with the blood of Christians, people who are coming to faith. Now, some of you may not be aware of this, but again, this is real. This is a fact. The Catholic Church is responsible for killing more Christians than any other entity on the planet. Catholic Church. And back in what were known as the Dark Ages, they were killing Christians by the hundreds, millions. So again, this is a woman, a false religious system that is killing Christians or people who are coming to faith in Christ, faith in God. Remember when we go back and the gospel, back over in 14, the gospel, he said in a loud voice, this was the angel who was going to preach the eternal gospel. This is after the church has been raptured. The gospel today is that Jesus was born of a virgin, lived a sinless life, died on the cross for our sins, rose again on the third day for our justification. And the gospel after the tribulation begins is fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens and the earth and the sea and the springs of water. It's not that it's a different gospel, but the message they're hearing is different. It's not what we're being saved with today, because things change in the tribulation period. So now you got this woman that's drunk with the blood of God's holy people, those that are coming to faith at that point, and they're probably coming in by hundreds of millions, and they're being killed in the hundreds of millions, is my belief. So that's all going on. And again, some people, like I said, believe that that's at the beginning of the first part of the tribulation. I don't see it that way, because the first 3.5 years there's a peace agreement, and it's not until 3.5 years in that the Antichrist even breaks the peace agreement. So he's not killing all those people at the beginning. To me, it's all more that's happening at the end. Then you got the 144,000 that are out evangelizing as well. And that happens in the first 3.5 years. So who knows? Maybe they are being killed all the way through. When I saw her, this is still now chapter 6. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. Now this is now John saying, when I saw her. Who is her in this case? The woman riding on the beast, the false religious system. And he's astonished at her because why? She's drunk with the blood of the martyrs, those who are coming to faith. And he's astonished not because it's a satanic move, but because it's a church. It's a religious system that's actually killing those who are coming to faith. And this is why he's astonished, because it shouldn't be that way. Questions, comments, input? Pretty quiet out there.
It's a lot.
It's
a lot.
It is, but we haven't gotten to a lot yet. We're about to get to a lot. But that hasn't even been a lot yet.
It's a lot of notes for me.
Woo. All right. But we're getting to it now. Then, verse 7. Then the angel said to me, why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and the beast she rides, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. Now he's going to clarify the whole thing right here. No problem. The beast, which you saw, once was, now is not, yet will come up out of the abyss and go to his destruction. There we go. You guys got it? No problem. The inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life, those who are not believers, from the creation of the world, will be astonished when they see the beast, because it once was, now is not, and yet will come. By the way, this calls for a mind with wisdom. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, verse 9. So, okay, let's settle in here for a second. There is several ways to interpret this as well. And I'm just going to give you some background. I won't go into a lot of it, and here's why. Each of the beliefs about these kingdoms that were and are to come, at the time when John is getting this, it's the same. So it doesn't really matter what was prior. But there are 7 heads, and let me just, I think I need to read some more of this real quick before we kind of dive into it. So chapter 9, this calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. So again, that's been interpreted as the 7 hills, the city on the 7 hills is Rome, as I'd mentioned earlier, but it also represents 7 hills represent governments. So 7 kingdoms, if you will. That's right here. They are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. But when he does come, must remain for only a little while. The beast, who once was and now is not, is an 8th king, and he belongs to the 7, going to his destruction. Piece of cake. So here's what's up. At the end of this, just know that when John is getting this, the kingdom that is in power at that time, either way, is Rome. Just like we've been talking about, it's Rome. There are some who believe that the 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is yet to come. The 5 that have fallen, some believe, is Egypt, who was the first real global power. And this goes back to the famine, back when, and this is all about God's economy now. Okay, this is about what God is doing, not necessarily about what the rest of the world is doing. So at the time, early on, when Jacob/Israel took his family of 70 people down to Egypt, because Joseph said, hey, come on down, plenty of food. And they came down and became a great nation. Egypt was in control of the world at that time. So Egypt would be the first kingdom. Then they were conquered by the Assyrians, and Assyria took over. And then the Babylonians, and Daniel, when Daniel's writing all of his book of Daniel, that's in Babylonian times because he's captive there. Remember, Daniel is taken as a young man with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he lives his whole life, basically, most of it, in Babylon, who was the kingdom of the world at that point. So that's Babylon and what you're getting in Daniel. And he then goes and says, remember the gold statue? He had the statue, and Nebuchadnezzar had the dream. And the head of gold was Babylon. And then he listed 4 other kingdoms. And it was Persia, or the Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome is what it is. So you got Egypt, Assyria are already gone. He's in Babylon, number 3. Babylon would be the 3rd one. Then the Medo-Persians under Cyrus go and take Babylon without a fight. That's 4. And then Greece, Alexander the Great, takes over and conquers Persia, and Greece becomes the world power. Then Rome, okay, at the time when Paul, yes, but John is getting this, it's Rome that's in control of everything. Now, there's another belief that it's not these various kingdoms, but it's kings in Rome, various Caesars. The first one, and these would be Caesars that died untimely. So Julius Caesar, he was killed. Tiberius Caesar was, I think, smothered. I think he was smothered to death. Caligula, can't remember. Claudius Caesar was poisoned. So those are 4 that have fallen. And then Nero was at the time of Paul, and Nero came and Nero committed suicide. That's 5. And at the time of John's writing, it was Rome. So Nero was Rome, if you will, and Domitian was the king that was at that time. So 5 had fallen, 1 was Domitian. He ultimately was killed. And then there's another king coming out of the quote unquote revived Roman Empire. Either way you go, you still get to Rome in power at the time as the kingdom. And what's going to happen in the future then, many believe, comes out of Rome. And we're going to get to why. All right, questions, comments, thoughts. This could be a little too much for you guys tonight, but a lot of background.
No, you explained it very well.
That's good. It's only taken me like 4 weeks.
That's why we gave you a couple of weeks off.
So, so the beast which you saw, verse 8, the beast which you saw once was, now is not, and yet will come again up out of the abyss to its destruction. Now, this could be, if we get over to after the 1,000-year reign, in chapter 20, the 1,000 years, when the verse 7, when the 1,000 years are over, Satan must be released from his prison because he's been thrown into the abyss. So he gets released again at the end of the 1,000 years, and he will go out to deceive the nations in the 4 corners, Gog and Magog, and then they're devoured, and then he's thrown into the lake of fire. So verse 8 could be about Satan coming up out of the abyss after the 1,000 years. It could be that when, remember in chapter 9, and the abyss, the angel came down with the keys to the abyss and opened it, and the locusts, remember all of the humanoid kind of locusts went and terrorized everybody. It could be that Satan was released at that point. It could be. And so it doesn't really give us any indication. It just says, he yet will come up out of the abyss and go to its destruction. So that's the beast. He's going to his destruction, one way or to another. The inhabitants of the earth whose names have not been written in the book of life, so these are the people, the earth dwellers who are not coming to faith from the creation of the world, will be astonished. And they will see the beast because it once was, now is not, and yet will come. And if you remember back over in chapter 13, when we were looking at the mark of the beast, and it performed great signs, causing fire to come down from heaven, because the signs that was given power to perform on behalf of the beast, deceive the nation. It ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast, who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. So the beast gets a fatal wound and then lives. So it looks like it comes back to life, kind of like Jesus once again. And so this is where it's a 7th and an 8th king. He's the 7th king as well, killed, or supposedly, and then rises to be an 8th king. That's where the 8th king comes from, that we're about to look at. So that's why everybody is astonished. Once was, now is not. And again, here, there's different interpretations. of the once was, now is not, because that's the angel talking to John at this time. And some believe that the once was, now is not, is Assyria when he's talking to John, and the Antichrist will come out of Assyria. Others, the ones that believe it's the Caesars, believe that it might be even Nero, a revived Nero, because Nero was so evil. I don't know that either one of those is right. All I know is there was a kingdom, an evil kingdom that once was, at the time of John was not, but will be again. And I believe that that's the Antichrist coming back, or the beast, to that is only after the church is raptured. Whew. Okay, comments, thoughts, input, bathroom break? Anybody? All right. Verse 9. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. They are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen. 1 is, the other has not yet come. But when he does come, he must remain for only a little while. So that's what we just got done explaining. The 5 that have fallen, 1 that was while John was getting this message, and 1 that is to come, that I believe is in the tribulation period. And he must remain for only a little while. The beast who once was, now is not, remember, now is not at John's time, is an 8th king. He belongs to the 7 and is going to his destruction. So the belief, the overriding belief, is that the 7th king that comes into power will be wounded, looking like he'd been killed. And I didn't go back and look at this, but we looked at this in the past about a beast that had its eye basically poked out and its right arm was shriveled. And there are many who believe, I subscribe to this, that the beast, who we refer to as the Antichrist, looks like they're killed and they get a severe wound, a fatal wound in the eye. Maybe they're shot, maybe it's an explosion or something, looks like it's dead, and then comes back to life. And that's when everybody goes, oh my gosh, who can come against the beast? Nobody can, because he can't die. That's kind of the thing that's going to be happening at that point. So he's an 8th king of the 7. Any questions on that? That makes sense?
Yes.
Verse 12. The 10 horns you saw, remember the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns? The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings along with the beast. So once the beast comes into power, there will be 10 kings. Now, there are, again, lots of different ideas on this. Historically, there's been a belief that it's a revived Roman Empire, and there would be 10 kings out of the European area. Again, I used to subscribe to that, but as I know the world today and what's being planned today, I don't believe that's the case anymore. I believe that the world will be split up into 10 regions. There won't be specific countries like there are now. They will be like North America, Mexico, US, and Canada will all be ruled by one person as a region. And there will be 10 of those political, economic regions around the globe. Candidly, that's what the Great Reset is all about. The World Economic Forum is trying to set that up right now. And again, up until 3 years ago, a lot of what we know today wasn't even known. But when you look at what's happening at our southern border, and that 5-6 million people are just flowing through, there's a big belief that who would be called conspiracy theorists, who in 12 months will be called, oh, people who knew what was going on. They were just called conspiracy theorists back then. That's all an attempt to eliminate borders of the US so that we have one large region. So when you look at what's happening in South America, many socialists have taken over in governments down in South America as well. So I believe that those 10 kings will come from 10 regions that aren't even around right now. They don't even exist. And that's why it says here, the 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom. Now, this is 2,000 years ago, he's writing this, but that's still today. They haven't received a kingdom yet, but they will for 1 hour is what's going to happen. At the very end, they're going to be assigned all of their power in these regions once these global regions get set up. Questions, comments, thoughts, input? Terry, I was listening to this thing and it said the same thing. Anybody? Okay. All right. So these 10 kings are ruling along with the beast. They have one purpose and will give their power and authority to the beast. So they're ruling with him. Then they're going to give their power to the beast. Then they will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them because he is, here we go, Lord of Lords and King of Kings. And with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. So when the Lamb comes back from heaven on his second coming, he's bringing heaven with him. He fights the battle that this is referring to right now. This would be the second coming of Jesus. This is why, again, I believe this all happens in the last very short period of time. I don't believe it's already happened because of what is being outlined right here. Do your own research. But so the Lamb is coming back. These 10 regions have been set up, and now they're trying to control the globe. They have a religious political system in power. The religious system, I believe, is the false prophet who, because people really need something to believe in, is that person that's moving people spiritually, if you will. Then the political piece of it is the government controlling things economically. So you can't buy or sell unless you have your digital ID in your wrist or your forehead. And all of that is being controlled greatly by what's happening until we get to the next couple of verses. So the Lamb comes back, will triumph over them. Verse 15, then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are the peoples, multitude, nations, and language. We talked about that already. The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. So this false religion that has been helping out somehow is no longer necessary. Now, it wasn't until about an hour ago that I thought for the very first time, my goodness, this could be Israel. This could be apostate Israel, not the 144,000 that are out evangelizing, but apostate Israel who is working in conjunction with the Antichrist because of the peace treaty that was set at the beginning of the 7-year tribulation period. Whoa! Could be. I never had that thought before until an hour ago. But then the beast turns on the prostitute, whether it's the Catholic Church, whether it's the Pope, whether it's Israel, we don't know. Don't know. We just know that the prostitute is the false religious system that is helping the political system, but they will bring her to ruin. This is the beast and the 10 horns, the political, the governmental side of it. Will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. But check it. Here we go. Verse 17. For God has put it into their hearts to accomplish his purpose. Whose purpose?
God's purpose.
God's purpose. God is in control of every bit of this, guys. For God has put it into their hearts. Whose hearts? The 10 kings, to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to hand over their power to the beast, or to hand over to the beast their royal authority until God's words are fulfilled. What? So all this is happening at the last hour, my opinion. They're giving their power over to the beast. They're trying to come and gather to make one final attack on Israel. Israel cries out. Jesus comes back, returns to fight the battle on their behalf, and he comes with all of the saints of heaven. Whoop, whoop. But now they turn on the prostitute, and then it says here, the woman you saw, the prostitute, is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. And if there wasn't enough interpretation, even the last verse there, verse 18, some believe that the great city is Babylon, a revived, renewed, rebuilt Babylon. Some believe that it's Rome. Some believe that it's the Vatican. Some believe that it's a metaphor, and it's a false religious even city. But I tend to believe myself, as I've read over this, poured over this, studied this, the great city ultimately is Rome, where the Vatican is. That's my belief. Because the great city could also be known as Israel. Heck, Israel was referred to as an adulteress. So, because remember, we're the bride of Christ, and the church, bride of Christ. And Jerusalem is referred to as daughter Zion. But hey, Babylon is referred to as daughter Babylon too. So, as a matter of fact, quick fun fact, you can use this at your next party. Babylon, the name Babylon for a city is the second most named city in all of the Bible, only second to Jerusalem. So you got Jerusalem, which really represents God and all that he's doing. And then you have Babylon that represents Satan and all that he's doing. That's ultimately how this all works out. Where the actual city is, what it represents, it ultimately is God versus Satan, good versus evil, what it really comes down to. And down below, there's a note here on the great city. The woman in John's vision is the great city Babylon, yet she is also the ancient mother of prostitutes. The satanic influence of this city over the world's leaders has continued from Babel, so back when they were building the Tower of Babel, through Babylon to Rome, its classic manifestation in the first century. So Rome was, in essence, had taken over for Babylon for the false religious system. And if you go back and look at the first, 1,500 years after Christ died, there was always, for the first 300 years, Christians were persecuted. We talked about that, persecuted greatly. Once Constantine came to faith in about 305, 310 AD, he then legalized Christianity and combined all of the Babylonian practices of mother-child worship and all the other gods, Ishtar, Tammuz, Hermes, Apollo, all those different gods who were being worshipped, all of them, the saints, we pray to Saint Paul, Saint Peter. I mean, there are people who believe that Peter was the first pope, which can't possibly be the case because popes weren't even instilled until the third century after Jesus was crucified. So he couldn't have been the first pope, but there are some Catholics who believe that's the case. So all of these things, these practices all got commingled when Christianity was legalized. Then from then on, now it was a state-sponsored religion And that's where everything became a mess. So you had religion being commingled with the government, which is why when the US started, the United States and wanted to secede and be independent, they developed in the Declaration of Independence a separation of church and state, because they didn't want the state in the church, not vice versa. And the Catholic Church ultimately comes from the state-run church in Rome, which was a revived Babylonian empire. Clear? Clear as mud?
Clear.
It's a little thinner than that.